Welcome everyone to We Hack Purple Streams, and today we have Richard Kranendonk, and he is going to tell us about the Canvas method. And I'm going to let you, well, actually, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Richard, so the audience can know you a bit better?
Yeah, sure. So I already told you where I live, in Utrecht. I have a background in IT. I worked for a very long time as a consultant and project manager, mostly on the implementation side of things, so new software or changing infrastructure, stuff like that. And a couple of years ago, around 2017, we all started getting very nervous here in Europe because of GDPR, because that was a new privacy regulation, and it was kind of like a feeling, if people who are old enough might remember the craze around the millennium bug. It was going to be 2000 and all computers would stop working, so people geared up for the apocalypse, and then it became 2000 and really nothing happened. So that's a bit what happened to GDPR. Gearing up for GDPR, everybody felt a real nervousness about it because they were going to get massive fines, their business was going to be shut down, and that just didn't happen. But I had a partnership with a law firm, and we helped organizations become GDPR compliant. And in the course of that, I worked a lot with people from information security in different organizations, and I gradually became more interested in the information security bit than in the legal bit that had to do with GDPR. So I got my CISSP certification. I worked as an interim security and privacy manager for 2 different companies, and I did a year of auditing and implementing ISO 27001. And during those years, I ran up to the same problem again and again, and that is if you realize that 80% of data breaches happens through human action, then it's very strange that if you look at something like ISO 27001, there's like 1 or 2 controls that deal with awareness and behavior. Most of it is technology focused. And you also see that with a lot of people who work in the field of security. There tends to be a focus on technological measures. And I guess that's understandable because a lot of us feel very comfortable working with that, and trying to get your point across to people in the organization who are outside of your technology and compliance bubble can be very hard. It's not that they don't want to, but a lot of the times they either don't really get enough context to feel what you're on about, or they feel like it's just not their responsibility because you are the guy or girl from IT or compliance. So security is your problem, not mine. So I try to find a way to make that connection. And I got inspired by the business model Canvas from Alex Osterwalder, who has developed canvases which are very popular in the startup world to map your whole business concept. And I thought we need something like that for security. We need something interactive that to gather people around and get them to talk about risks and controls and stuff they can do to reduce the risks. And in that process, become aware of and make explicit of what they can do themselves and what they need others to do. And so start up a dialogue. So if it's okay with you, if there are no questions already, I'd like to take you through the method.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to see. That was my next question. So, what's the Canvas method? How does this work? Tell me everything.
Yeah. Okay, so let me rearrange some windows here, and I'm going to try to project my browser, share screen. How do we do this? I was expecting to see something like a window.
So if you go at the bottom of Zoom in the middle, there's a green thing that says share screen where it's a square with an arrow that goes up. So if you click that, then it should give you a thing to pop up and give you some options of what to share.
Yeah, and I see I have to grant access.
Oh,
Zoom
yeah.
a minute. So I'm actually, this is horrible. I have to quit and reopen the Zoom app. So bear with me for a second here.
Okay. Okay. So quit and come back and I'll tell jokes while you're gone. Hi, everyone. Sorry about this short pause, but we will figure it out. Richard will be right back. For everyone else that's here, so what types of events would you like to see at We Hack Purple? Because, I mean, while I have an engaged audience and you're waiting, this is a thing that me and my team have wanted to know for a while. Like, do you want more interactive types of things, or do you want to watch while people talk and do demos? Are you interested in more like hands-on types of stuff? You could put your answers in the chat because Richard's back. But if you wanted to give me feedback, even if it's just directly to me in the chat, I'm interested to hear it. Welcome back, Richard. You're on mute. You have to unmute, sorry.
How's that?
There we go.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was a nerve-wracking moment for me.
No, you're doing great.
There we are. This one I need. So, are you looking at a kind of slide at the moment? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go. So what we want to do is to get a plan, do, check, act cycle into the organization, into actually all departments of the organization, where people think about risks, what they can do about that, to see if what they have implemented to reduce the risk actually works, and if necessary, improve on that. So what I always start with, because this is, I have to explain a bit more. It's a method that has a small number of workshops dealing with different topics. And usually I have these large canvases. I print them out on a large size to put on a wall in a meeting room, and we gather around it and we work very interactively with post-it notes. I can't do that now, so I've made a simulation in this case, Miro whiteboarding app. And because I work with teams that are not technical, teams that are usually outside of our compliance and security bubble, I need to explain a little bit, give them a little bit of context on how we deal with risks and risk management. So the first thing I start with is this slide or something that looks like it, and I work from the inside out. I tell them, if we look at security, we are not only looking at keeping things a secret, but we are also looking to have data available when you need it, and to make sure that the data we're working with makes sense, and that's the integrity part. And that's, if you look at the outer circle, you see all the influences which work on our risk landscape, because things are constantly changing. Technology changes, the strategy of the organization changes. There may be changes in work processes, and even the execution of work processes themselves causes risks, and there are stakeholders and social developments around us. A good example is the corona pandemic. We had the COVID pandemic, which forced a lot of people to work from home, and that also created a whole fresh risk landscape around remote working. So that's to make them aware of security, that is not a status, it's a process. You have to work on it constantly.
Cool.
Don't mind interrupting if there's any questions. I don't have the chat channel open myself. So
I
let me
will tell
know.
you if there's something in the chat, but everyone who's watching, if you have questions, you can put a question in the chat for Richard, or if you feel really brave, you could unmute and you could ask it verbally yourself. Richard's nice, trust me.
Okay. So now that we have a slight bit of knowledge about security and managing security, we can start with a workshop. Before we start with the workshop, the point of departure, or the how you say, the spot on the horizon, are the strategic goals for information security, which have been set by management or leadership before we start this process. Because I mainly work at the operational level, it would not make sense to start defining strategic goals with every team. So let's say, as usual, strategic goals are very, how you say, wide, not very specific. So one of the goals is the interest of our clients is number one. The second one is information is always accessible in a safe way. And the third one is we anticipate change and are prepared for incidents. So they are written on this large canvas, which hangs on the wall of our meeting room. And then I guide people through the different risk sources there are. And that's two areas. That's the context of the team. So the world they work in, the organizational environment they work in, and the structure of work itself. So let me see, because I need something extra here. Yes. So what we do, I invite them to talk about the context in which they work. And I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, like so. So risk sources. So suppose this organization we're working with is implementing ISO 27001 information risk security framework. So that's one of the things happening in the environment of this team. They also need to be GDPR compliant because they are doing business in Europe. Someone mentions that they get bothered by sales who wants access to their user database. Let's suppose this is a software company, wants access to their user database, and that's a problem for them because they think this creates new risks that they would rather not have. So you also see that this can be very different kind of stuff or issues people come up with, and that's fine because I always, to keep the dynamic going, to keep people involved, I'm not getting into discussions if it's a valid risk they mention or if it's not in the scope of this project. I can always do that later, but if I start correcting immediately, then people are like, yeah, okay, this is one of those other things where we just have to fill in the blanks and nobody's really interested in what we got to say. So sea level rise can also be a problematic thing. And then there are ransomware attacks, which they are afraid of. So these are all examples of stuff that happens in the environment. Then we are going to look at the structure of the work themselves. So what's the work processes look like? What technology do they use? What information do they get from others? What do they have to deliver to other teams or to outside stakeholders? And an example is that employees use personal phones for work. Someone in the team thinks this is a source of risk. Then there are different branch offices which mail employee data to the central HR department.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you guide them to get this list? Because sometimes I find like I'll ask everyone, they're like, everything's fine. I'm like, obviously everything's not fine. Like, how do
No.
you make them, I don't know, like get them comfortable maybe enough so that they'll actually talk to you? How's that work?
Okay, that's a good question. I usually try to get them on the wrong foot in a friendly way, because usually I get into the room and then there's the team and they sit ready. Some of them have a notebook on their lap, and they have these friendly but kind of bored faces, and I usually know what they might be expecting, that someone from security or IT is coming down and is going to tell them what they should stop doing, and that there's this new fantastic encryption technology which they all have to use, which really is dreadful in their work processes. So that's the setting, and I'll ask them, so what do you expect? And these are the examples they come with, mostly politely voiced, of course. And then I tell them, that's not what we're going to do. I'm going to invite you to talk about the stuff that worries you in your work. And there's no wrong answer. What it's about is that I learn from you what problems you see or what risks you see. And well, maybe it's also a personality question, I don't know, but it usually breaks the ice. And then I get stuff like this to get on the board. And I also keep encouraging them and thanking them for every input. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I find sometimes that can be hard, so thank you.
Okay. So there's also a new SaaS application they're going to use, a new marketing campaign. They have to move to single sign-on, and there's the use of portable hard drives. All sources of risk. So then we go to the next step, and I ask them, so explain a bit about what the actual risk is. And this often needs a bit of guidance, because people, because I have to coach them a bit in making the risk concrete, instead of just having a general source of unease. So let's continue. The risks are, because of ISO 27001 project, employees don't know their new policies. There's GDPR compliance. Do we need a data protection officer? Sales wants access to the user database. This may be unlawful processing in the context of GDPR. The sea level is rising, maybe. Our data center could get flooded. There are ransomware attacks. So the risk here is that people actually respond to phishing mails. So I go on like this. Employees use personal phones, and these may be easier to hack. Branches mail employee data. That could cause a data breach. There's a new SaaS application. How are we with the security of the vendor? Is that okay? We are doing a new marketing campaign with direct mail. We may get our service blacklisted. We are moving to SSO, so maybe there will be a period in which we can't reach our applications. And the use of portable HDs, the risk is loss and theft. So this is all just examples of stuff that might be going bad. Next step. Not all risks are, it's not necessary that we make controls for all those risks. Some risks might be acceptable. It's also possible that the team I'm working with isn't in the position or doesn't have the knowledge or the resources to deal with the risks themselves. So we have to distribute these risks to one of four categories. The first is mitigate. That means the team is able and feels responsible to handling the risk themselves. You can transfer the risk. that means someone else is going to take care of the risks. That might be the IT department or a solution provider. Some risks are acceptable, either because the impact is low or the chance is very low, or simply like an act of God, you can't really do something about it. And the fourth possibility is to avoid the risk, and that means that you are changing your behavior, or maybe outsourcing certain processes so that you don't have to deal with the risk yourself. So to keep me from confusing stuff, I color coded it. That's normally not what will be on the post-its. So these are the risks that the team we're now working with feels they should and can deal with themselves. So we move them to this square. Then there are risks that they cannot deal with themselves. They move them to the transfer area. Then there's stuff they feel they can, where the risk is acceptable, or the risk is just low enough to accept, and these go here. And then the last thing is unlawful processing. Apparently they are not prepared to give sales access to the user database. And the portable hard disks can be lost or stolen, so we are going to stop with the use of portable hard disks. So now you see I have made, put it in different categories. Now in a larger organization, not every team has the mandate to make all these decisions. So usually there's less discussion about the mitigation part. But certainly, if a team says, well, we accept this risk, the compliance manager or the IT security officer may say, well, that's not for you to decide, because there are other things in play and we need to control these risks. So here you start a dialogue between departments and between teams to get them to agree on something. That might not work. And in that case, there will always be like a higher power within the organization, the CISO, or maybe the CEO or the CTO, which has to make a final decision on that. But at least now the decision is clear, documented, and understandable for everybody. So then we are going to make the next step. And that is for all the risks in mitigate, we move to the next canvas. For the second workshop. Things that get transferred will be discussed with the team or organization the risk is transferred to. If it's accepted, then we need to get an okay from CISO or compliance or a comparable function within the organization. And if there are certain risks that need to be avoided, that always depends on the issue at hand. So here again, it's finding a solution that's acceptable to the important stakeholders. Now, of course, I'm mainly used to the European context, where there's usually a lot of room for where cooperation is often a model that's explored. It might work different in very hierarchical organizations and cultures. I have less experience with that, so that's like a kind of disclaimer about how effective this will be. So now we go to the second workshop, and all the risks that were in the mitigation part will now be transferred to the second canvas. Now, this is the part where we are going to explore solutions for the risks we have. You see that again, the strategic goals are the same because that's the point on the horizon or the orientation point which needs to be a constant. And we are going to look at solutions. So create a fallback scenario. That's a solution to the loss of access because the move to SSO. In cooking shows, they say, here's one I prepared earlier. So that's the case in this example. Of course, we need to identify the controls in this workshop, but to keep me from typing, I made the stickies already. So mailing employee data means it has to be mitigated by using encrypted mail. There's the risk of responding to phishing mail. Let's say the control is communicate on how to recognize them. For the vendor security, we have specified vendor requirements, and for the new policies, we want to create instructional videos. So here you see possible controls to mitigate the risk. And working in this way enhances a sense of responsibility within the teams themselves, and that changes behavior and attitude towards risks. Now, we also need to know if a certain control is effective. So we have to think of ways to measure the effectiveness. So if we have the fallback scenario for the move to SSO, we are going to need switch over tests, and we want them to be successful in less than a minute. If we say a control is to use encrypted mail, we will need to establish that all classified mails, all mails with employee data are actually encrypted, so we can measure that. To establish the effectiveness of the instructional videos, we will have phishing tests, and we need the clicks on that to actually be 10% of what they used to be. Vendor requirements means all vendors must sign new requirements, and for the instructional videos, I see I positioned them wrong, but for the instructional videos, we will need a 90% score on the questionnaire to see if people actually understand what is happening there. So this is the second workshop. We now have controls, and we have a way of measuring it. And now these controls need to be implemented. So that's not part of the method themselves. There are other ways to manage implementation. But because this is a cycle, we want to see if stuff is working like we hope to. After a certain period, typically 3 months to half a year, I come back to the same team, and I bring along this one, and that is a sheet in which we use to discuss what has happened in the last months since I talked to them. So have there been any security incidents? That's important to discuss, because that means there's a risk which may need additional treatment. So we try to establish the root cause of an incident, and we actually look at improvements. We also look at the controls that have been implemented and see how effective they have been, and if we need to improve there. So I have a lot of examples here. I will just move them into the sheet to save us time. And I hope this is large enough for all of you to read the text, and these are just some examples. So it may look like this. So now we have full cycle because we are moving into the next cycle where we can have new improvements, and that's what actually happens. If we have completed this one, we go to the next iteration, and the team will re-evaluate the risks which they identified earlier and see if there are new risks and which risks are now acceptable and need no further mitigation. So, any questions so far?
I don't see any in the chat, and I'm good because I just keep interrupting you and I have questions.
Yeah,
But everyone else who's watching, I want to encourage you to ask questions if you have them. Don't worry, Richard will be very nice.
I will. I'm trained to be nice.
Awesome.
So we now have the cycle, and to keep track of the maturity, I have one last sheet. I promise you no more sheets after this. And let me see if I can locate it. It's here. So anyone who's familiar with process maturity or information management systems maturity, you will see that there are a lot of, I'll walk you through the sheet. So we have the goals that have been set by management. We also have the controls that we identified earlier, and then for each control you need to have a policy. You need to know if it's implemented or not. You need to know if it's monitored or not, if it's evaluated, and if there are any improvements identified. So I usually hang this more or less permanently in an area of the organization where a lot of people pass. So they can follow, they can see the information security management system grow as we move through the cycles with different teams. So to keep it top of mind and really make it part of the culture of the organization. So I guess I am now through showing you all these sheets. So if you don't mind, I stop sharing the screen now, and we can see if there are any more interesting things to discuss. And then I have to click this button. So give me some feedback, please.
I found it helpful. So the format that you have for each one of the canvases, is there, oh, here I am. I'm like, I should turn my camera on so you can see me. Like, can we print those out? How do we get those? Or are you going to share those electronically? Like if we want to try doing what you did at work?
I have a website. You can download them for free. I published the sheets under Creative Commons, so everybody's free to use them or even adapt them to their own purposes. Here's the link to my site. You can download them in the form as a PDF, and there's also a link to the GitHub repository if you would like to contribute to the development of these canvases. So that's where you can download them.
Excellent. There's a question in the chat from Erica. Is this whiteboard an exercise to do with different teams at our companies?
Definitely. That's really the central idea of the whole method, to do different workshops with teams, guide them through these canvases, and activate them on security thinking and making their own issues important and explicit. I hope that's the answer to the question.
Awesome. Does anyone else have questions for Richard? This is your chance. Oh, we can't hear you, Erica. You need to unmute. Or, oh, it says you're not muted. I still can't hear you.
I have a question.
There.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Tanya. So because this is an exercise that can be done with various teams or stakeholders at our companies, I was kind of curious how you're able to identify the risks that each team may more likely or not deal with or interact with. Because I think it was the first or second whiteboard where quickly was able to identify certain risks, but how did you come or arrive to all those different event scenarios?
How do I get them to identify the risks?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the funny thing is, people are aware of a lot of risks in general in the way they work. There's also a lot of risks they are probably not aware of, but this this method doesn't claim to be 100% have 100% view on everything. So this you can see it more like a communication and awareness instrument than something that would totally replace risk identification and risk analysis. But again, people are mostly aware of a lot of things that causes risks. They are usually not invited to talk about them as such. So they discuss it with their colleagues, with their direct team members, and then they say, yeah, well, that's a problem, but it's not, I guess IT is aware of that. And then they go on with their job. So this helps them make it explicit and documented.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that answer. I also really agree with that too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question.
There's another question in the chat from Nicholas. So it says, thank you, that was very informative. How would this relate, or how could you use this when it comes to developing an overall security strategy?
I don't think this is enough to have an overall security strategy, but it fills in a part where behavior and awareness becomes important. If you look at the sheets and the cycle that is here, it's a very good mapping to something like ISO 27001, because they also have this cycle. They also demand that you choose a treatment for a risk which can be accept or mitigate or transfer or avoid. So there's a direct mapping to existing security management frameworks. You can also do this at the start of a project where when you're implementing information security management to get people involved. So it should be part of it should either be a communication instrument between an existing framework, or it can be used to identify risks that are the starting point for a management cycle. So if you look at software for governance and regulatory compliance, there's a lot of software for that. They always start with, these are the risks, but they don't do anything, at least not the software I'm aware of. They don't really help in identifying the risks themselves. So this is an instrument to do that.
I think that's a really good answer. And I also think that it sounds weird, but when you brainstorm, you don't just say, okay, brainstorm, and then people just immediately have all the answers. Like doing things to sort of guide them to and you're not choosing what they're going to give, but just like bringing them maybe the energy or the thought, the thought processes, like to get them to start thinking of ideas is really important.
Yeah, and what we all also discussed at the beginning of this session, I always underline that there are no wrong answers. We are not striving for any 100% accuracy. We are not going to have heated discussions about whether this is information security or should be something else, or whether this is a valid risk or within scope or not. It's exactly what you say. It's about energy and getting people to participate in this whole process.
So there's another question, and I don't think that it was so it was directly to me, but I don't think it was supposed to be directly to me. So would it be fair to characterize this as more tuned to getting non-security employees actively engaged in security by making it their idea, rather than exhaustively accounting for every risk, like helping them discover that it needs to be secured.
Yeah, that's that's actually spot on, because it's this is meant for people outside of the technology and IT bubble to help them in security thinking, in becoming more security on the whole, and that's what this does. And it can also be an instrument in the toolkit of a CISO to get the company on board, because that's often something which gives problems, because we can implement technology, we can write policies, we can have all kinds of measures for people who don't adhere to the policy, but to really change behavior, people need to feel ownership, and that's what this helps them with.
That's such a good way to put it, like both of you, the question asker and the answer. I really like that. And I find that when you can bring someone to the idea themselves, like you said, they'll have more ownership over it. Like they'll take it more personally. They'll make it part of, it's not like, oh, Richard and Tanya from security said I have to do this. It's like, I better do this so I can protect my work.
Yeah. Yeah, and also when you have like a common ground between non-technical people and people from compliance and security, the dialogue will become much more effective, instead of just throwing tickets or over a wall, or shooting questions through the mail.
Yeah, this is great. So everyone, this is your last chance to ask questions to Richard, because eventually he's going to leave, because he did the whole Canvas method for us. Richard, I thought this was really helpful, like almost like a guide that could bring me through trying to get answers out of people. So I really liked that. Thank you. And so far I'm seeing thank yous in the chat, but I'm not seeing any more questions now. So is there anything else that you wanted to add, or like if someone's going to get started doing this, should they just go to the website link? Which actually, I'm going to say the website link out loud so that if someone's watching this later, they can see, but it's also going to be in the show notes below this video on YouTube. So go to www.iso27diy, like do it yourself, DIY.com. So iso27diy.com. Awesome.
Yeah. So on the website, there's also a short video about 2.5 minutes, which explains the whole method. I will write a manual later on. I haven't actually found the time to do that yet. People are free to approach me through mail or Twitter or whatever. All the contact points are on the website, and I will be glad to assist them in actually start using this.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. This is really great. I really appreciate you doing this workshop with our community, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity and guiding me a bit through this, because I told you earlier I was a little bit nervous for this, but I think we had a great time.
Yeah, I think that it was really clear. And I know that normally you do this on physical paper. And so it's like, how's this going to work? But it felt, so I know you did a lot of work to set it up, but it felt like effortless. Like you're like, oh, just drag and drop these things and just do this. I'm like, yes, no one has to read my terrible handwriting. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. And there's many thank yous in the chat now. And
yeah,
so
much appreciated.
Yes. Well, okay, everyone. Thank you, Richard, for presenting. Thank you, everyone, for attending and for your questions, because it's way more interesting when we have questions. And I think that we're going to say goodbye to everyone. Oh, yes. And the person said, good guess about the accidental DM. It was actually for everyone. So that's good. And Richard, we'll see you next time. Thank you.
I hope so. Okay.
Okay, everyone. Thank you. Until next
Bye-bye.
time.